Hello everyone. In this video, we are going to learn second conditional. In order to do that, first of all, we will shortly remember what we have learned on conditionals so far, and then we will study second conditional. Let's begin. As you all know, a conditional sentence includes a dependent and an independent clause. The dependent clause includes the condition, and we started with if, so we call it the conditional clause or the if clause. The independent clause introduces what happens under that condition, and it is the main clause of the conditional sentence. Let's remember, we can use the conditional clause either before or after the main clause. When we start the sentence with the conditional clause, we use a comma before the main clause. When the main clause comes first, we do not use a comma before the conditional clause. The two sentences that you see on the screen are examples to two different types of conditionals. The first one is a zero conditional. We use the zero conditional to talk about things that are always true, like scientific facts or habitual actions. Since we assume that the same condition always produces the same result, we use the present simple in both parts. The second sentence is the first conditional. We use the first conditional to describe a specific real condition in the present or future and its possible result. We use the present simple tense in the conditional clause and will plus infinitive without to in the main clause. We can use modal verbs to express weaker possibility and ability or to give advice. It's important to note that conditionals can be used to talk about real or unreal situations. Both zero and first conditionals are about real conditions and possible results based on actual situations. Let's have a look at a different sentence. If I had enough time, I would take a nap. However, I'm really busy working on my project. We will analyze this sentence with the help of two questions. Question 1. Does the speaker have enough time? Question 2. Is he talking about the present or the past? Use the information given in the second sentence and think about the answer. Now, the answer to question 1 is no, he doesn't. He's really busy, as we can understand from the second sentence. And the answer to question 2 is he's talking about the present moment of speaking. Again, you can understand this from the use of present continuous in the second sentence. Actually, you don't even need to look at the second sentence. The conditional sentence gives us all the information that we need to answer these questions. What the speaker means in the first sentence is, in reality, I don't have time, so I don't take a nap. As you might guess, this is the second conditional. We use the second conditional to describe an imaginary, impossible, or unlikely situation. It expresses a hypothetical way of thinking. We think of the opposite of an event or state in the present or future and suggest an imaginary result. We use the second conditional to talk about a present or future condition and its result. Let's have a look at the form closely. As you can see on the screen, in the conditional clause, we use if and a past simple or past continuous sentence, and in the main clause, we use would with infinitive without to. As in other conditionals, you can start the sentence with the conditional clause or the main clause. But if you start with the conditional clause, don't forget the comma before the main clause. Now, here are some other sentences. If he knew the answer, he would tell you. This means he doesn't know the answer, so he doesn't tell you. The band wouldn't play so well if they didn't practice regularly. The band plays so well because they practice regularly. This is what we understand from this sentence. If it weren't raining, I could hang the clothes out to dry. Now this means it's raining, so I can't hang the clothes out to dry. We use the past simple or past continuous in the conditional clause and would in the main clause, not because it's about a past situation, but because it is unreal. The purpose is to distance our language from reality. In this way, we can also distinguish the second conditional from the first conditional. Let's remember, we use the second conditional to talk about unreal, imaginary, or unlikely present or future conditions and results, and we use if with past simple or past continuous in the conditional clause and would with infinitive without to in the main clause. In order to understand it better, let's do a very short practice. Now, think about an astronaut. What does an astronaut do in space? Imagine that you are an astronaut and you are in space. What would you do? Try to travel to other planets? Do different experiments? Go for a spacewalk? Now pause the video, think about your answers for a minute, and take notes. Here I have some sentences for you, and I will always begin in the same way. If I were an astronaut. So if I were an astronaut, I would try to travel to other planets. If I were an astronaut, I would do different experiments. If I were an astronaut, I would do a spacewalk. So, as in here, we can use the second conditional to describe present situations that are imaginary, not real. So obviously, I'm not an astronaut. I just imagine myself as an astronaut and talk about what I would like to do in this imaginary situation. Here is another example. I would ride a bike to school every day if I lived in a small town. So I don't live in a small town and I don't ride a bike to school. Now you can use this function of the second conditional to give excuses. Imagine that your friend asks for your help. You want to help, but you have a very important job interview. So you can use the second conditional to explain your friend why you can't help them. And say, if I didn't have a job interview, I would help you. But I can't. Anyway, we can use the second conditional to talk about future conditions that are perhaps possible but unlikely. This is very similar to the first function, but slightly different. Let's see these two examples. It would be wonderful if I found a cheap apartment with a sea view. Here, finding a cheap apartment with a sea view is not impossible. However, mostly apartments with sea view are quite expensive, so there is a very small chance to find a cheap apartment with a sea view. Therefore, we use the second conditional. If I won the lottery, I would travel around the world. Winning the lottery is not impossible if you have a lottery ticket, but again, it's a very small possibility, therefore we use the second conditional. Sometimes we use the second conditional to give advice. If I were you, I wouldn't spend all my money on clothes. If I were you, I would start studying regularly. Of course, you can change you and the object position with other objects. If I were him, I would find a new hobby. If I were Sarah, I wouldn't trust everyone easily. Probably you have noticed so far that I have used were instead of was in the second conditional. In fact, using were in unreal situations is more common, especially while giving advice. But using was is also okay. Now, if we come to the result clause, we can of course find some other alternatives to would. You can use some other modal verbs in the main clause to express degree of certainty, permission, or a recommendation about an outcome. Let's see some examples. If my son were older, he could stay at home alone. If I made $50,000 a month, I could go on a long vacation. Here, could means would be able to. To express weaker possibility, we can use might. She might do the test better if she were more careful. Now, you too must be very careful here because different from the first conditional, in the second conditional, we can't use may for weaker possibility. We can only use might. Finally, let's talk about questions. Like other conditionals, we can use the second conditional in a question, but we use the question word order only in the main clause. We don't change the conditional clause. So I repeat this once more. We use the question word order only in the main clause. We never change the conditional clause. Here are some examples. What would you do if you had a Porsche? If you were the president, what would you change? Where would you live if you could live anywhere in the world? Now, as you see, we can use the conditional clause either at the end of the sentence or in the beginning. Before we finish, let's summarize the second conditional once more. Now, we use the past simple or past continuous in the conditional clause and would with infinitive without to in the main clause. But the meaning is present or future. The second conditional is actually very easy, but the most confusing part is the use of language. You can also use the second conditional to give advice. And don't forget, were is more common than was, but was is also alright. Finally, instead of would, you can also use could to mean would be able to, and might to mean would possibly. If you need to do some further study, you can use our coursebook, New Language Leader Intermediate, Unit 5, Lesson 2. And if you have any questions, please contact your instructor. Have a nice day and take care.